All right, welcome back. This is the second presentation of Chapter 10 on Congress. With this presentation, we are looking at, again, some of the roles that representatives play. We're also going to talk a little bit about the incumbency advantage, the fact that certain people, once you hold elective office, will have advantages in seeking re-election to those offices. Then we're going to talk a little bit about apportionment and gerrymandering and redistricting and how that can be done with partisan intent. So representatives play an important role as agents, right? The idea of representatives as an agent is in some ways like the lawyer-client relationship. The primary difference, of course, is that lawyers typically don't represent hundreds of thousands or even millions of clients as members of the House and Senate do. But the criterion of performance is similar. The internet has significantly increased communication between constituents and congressional offices, certainly in the day prior to social media and all these other, kind of advanced forms of communication. Members of Congress typically could only really interact with a handful of constituents at a time. But again, one constant, one through line for members of Congress going all the way back to early history is that they spent a lot of time and resources devoted to casework, which refers to efforts by members of Congress to resolve problems constituents are experiencing with government agencies. And so again, members of Congress devote a lot of time and effort to clearing those problems up, because even if that person may not have voted for you, if you're helping them, it dramatically increases the likelihood that that they will vote for you in the future. So in many states and districts, one or two issues are the clear priorities. For example, in states like Alaska, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Texas, and South Dakota, representatives are far more likely to be leading advocates for oil and energy interests than anything else. In other states, New York and California, it'll be banking. Some other states, it'll be, some other kind of issue. Congressional elections in the past, decisions about who would run for a particular office were made by local party officials. They'd recruit candidates. Today, American party organizations lack the power to dictate which candidates will run. There is an important concept, the idea of an incumbency advantage, which basically means that candidates holding office enjoy significant advantages in seeking re-election to Congress. Typically, around 90% of members of Congress seeking re-election are able to successfully defend their seats. Part of the reason for that high success rate is that members facing difficult re-election bids will often retire rather than confront that challenge and try to overcome it. Incumbents are generally vulnerable only in a narrow set of circumstances. Usually incumbents running in their first re-election campaign are often at their most vulnerable, particularly in narrowly divided districts and states. Otherwise, there are three circumstances most likely to leave an incumbent vulnerable. One would be redistricting, where they find themselves in a redrawn district that have lots and lots of new voters that may be registered to the other party. Coattails, the possibility that a presidential election may pull lots and lots of members of his party across the finish line and get them to victories where they otherwise might have lost in a midterm election. And then, of course, scandal, where a member of Congress gets caught up in doing something untoward, something that demonstrates corrupt intent or some kind of sex scandal. These are the kinds of things that get people defeated in elections. So what are some other factors that kind of lend this advantage? One thing is it's a lot easier as an incumbent to raise money for re-election because you have demonstrated you can win. People with money in your district and state are more likely to donate to you, to try and get on your good side. Members of the House and Senate also have what is known as the franking privilege, which means that they get free postage for informational mailings back to their districts. Congress members can also take advantage of ribbon-cutting ceremonies to raise their local profiles. They oftentimes can be interviewed on local news if they make themselves available. Being on TV is an advantage. Members of Congress have an advantage of a record on which to run for re-election. They can say, here are the things I have accomplished on your behalf. Incumbents can use pork barrel politics to steer money and jobs to their districts or states. The late Senator Robert Byrd of West Virginia is often described as the king of pork. During his long Senate career, Byrd was the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee. He secured over $10 billion in roads, infrastructure, and federal buildings and the like to his state. So that's a huge advantage. Who participates? Who actually is more consequential in getting people elected to Congress? If you look at it, and this has not always historically been the case, women actually vote at a somewhat larger proportion. They are a larger proportion of the electorate than their numbers would suggest. To some extent, that means that men are voting at lower rates. If you look at the part of this slide on the right, by age cohort, 18 to 29-year-old Americans are 22% of the population, yet they're only 13% of the electorate. That's a problem, right? Younger people are underrepresented in the electorate. Americans 65 and older are 20% of the population, but they're 26% of the electorate. So again, people that show up generally have a greater influence over the political process. This slide also shows the same thing, right? Whites are 62% of the population, but they're 72% of the electorate. Blacks are 13% of the population, but only 11% of the electorate. It's even more skewed with Latinos. Income is also a significant predictor here. People who make under $30,000 are over half of the population, but they're only 17% of the electorate. And people who make over $200,000 a year are only 2% of the population, but they're 9% of the electorate. So obviously socioeconomic status plays a powerful role. Again, the power of incumbency, if you look at, rarely is the situation that incumbents who are seeking re-election are actually defeated. And, if you look at the low points, like 1980, that was also the time when you had a massive shift of voters from the Democratic to the Republican Party in the South. That was the last real significant realignment. But again, if you are an incumbent, you have won before, and presumably you can find a way to win again. So that is sort of, again, part of the advantage that's built in. Apportionment and redistricting. Every 10 years, the Constitution requires a census be taken, and that triggers a federal redistricting process. Now, due to the Reapportionment Act of 1929, the composition of the U.S. House of Representatives is fixed at 435, which really creates a zero-sum process for determining how many representatives each state will receive. In most states, redistricting is controlled by state legislatures, which gives rise to the partisan process of gerrymandering, where the party in the majority tries to make sure that their party's candidates have a greater likelihood of winning as many seats as possible. Partisan gerrymandering is increasingly controversial and has led to calls for independent nonpartisan commissions to take over the redistricting process. Currently, 21 states employ some form of nonpartisan or bipartisan redistricting commissions to draw federal district boundaries. Of those, 13 use redistricting commissions to exclusively draw electoral boundaries. A 14th state, Iowa, uses a special redistricting process that uses neither the state legislature nor independent redistricting commissions to draw district boundaries. In 2019, the Supreme Court ruled that gerrymandering was a political question that lay beyond the court's ability to adjudicate, and that really opened the floodgates to more and more partisan efforts to control how district boundaries are drawn. Racial gerrymandering. In 1982, there were amendments to the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that banned deliberate attempts to use redistricting to discriminate against black voters. The essence of partisan gerrymandering is in maximizing the wasted votes of the minority party. White Republicans and black politicians have often colluded to create what are known as majority-minority districts. There are two dimensions to this kind of, to gerrymandering generally. One involves cracking, where the minority party's voters are split into various parts that are smaller than the number of supporters of the majority party. And the other involves packing, where the minority party's supporters are concentrated in one district, where effectively the majority party will concede that seat in order to gain 2 seats surrounding that area. So packing and cracking. There are a lot of political consequences that are subject to controversy. Conservatives tend to argue that the political effects of gerrymandering are minimal, and the advantages Republicans derive from partisan gerrymandering is in part simply an artifact of Democratic voters preferring to live in compact urban areas, while Republican supporters generally live in more sparsely inhabited regions of the country. So liberals, on the other hand, contend that at minimum the current status quo violates the spirit of the democratic principle of one person, one vote, and encourages anti-democratic tendencies among Republicans, including attempts to suppress the votes of minorities. So again, if you look, here's the projected reapportionment map. Oklahoma is set to get 5 congressional districts. That is back to the original number that they had at statehood. Plus 2, that means they get 7 electoral college votes in presidential elections. So how do you go about contacting a member of Congress? First, do some research so that you know what you're talking about before you go and mess with them. Second, identify, how to go about contacting them. Everyone's got a website these days. They all have, let me know how I'm doing kind of comments, where you can, literally email based on a particular issue. Always contact your own representative or senator. Members from other states are not interested in what you have to say. There is no single script to follow in contacting a member, but you should always give your name, location, your background, whether you're a veteran or an educator, and you should be respectful. Even when you're criticizing them, I think you should, basically acknowledge that they hold a position of trust and authority. All right, so that's it for this presentation. When we come back, we will continue our discussion of Congress. I'll see you next time.